They had no idea the man they just accused of stealing actually owned half the jewelry store and was about to expose their shocking prejudice in the most devastating way imaginable. Picture this: a billionaire CEO gets followed by security, accused of planning a heist, and nearly arrested by police, all while shopping at his own luxury jewelry store on Rodeo Drive. But when he reveals his identity using secret partner access codes that leave everyone speechless, the swift justice that follows will restore your faith in accountability. Watch until the end to see how one man's false theft accusation sparked a $3 million revolution that's transforming luxury retail across America. This isn't just about racial profiling in high-end stores. It's proof that even our most humiliating experiences can become the catalyst for extraordinary change that protects millions of people who deserve to shop with dignity. They had no idea the man they just accused of stealing actually owned half the jewelry store and was about to expose their shocking prejudice in the most devastating way imaginable. Meet Alexander Hayes, a name that should command instant respect in every luxury retail establishment across America, yet remains invisible to those who measure worthiness by the color of skin rather than the content of character. At 44 years old, this visionary entrepreneur has accomplished what most business leaders only fantasize about: transforming a humble pawn shop in Detroit into Prestige Holdings, a luxury retail empire worth $2.4 billion that spans 35 states and employs over 15,000 people in the most exclusive shopping districts of America. But Alexander's journey to the pinnacle of luxury retail wasn't built on inherited wealth or family connections. Growing up in a neighborhood where owning anything of value made you a target, he watched his hard-working mother save for months to buy a simple gold chain, only to be followed and harassed by store security who assumed she couldn't afford it. Those childhood memories of being treated like criminals while trying to purchase legitimate goods burned into his consciousness, creating an unshakable determination to build something different. Luxury retail spaces where excellence in product would be matched by excellence in treating every customer with dignity. Starting with that single pawn shop, Alexander revolutionized the industry by proving that luxury goods could be sold with integrity, that high-end retail could welcome customers from all backgrounds, and that treating people with respect actually increases profits rather than diminishing them. His stores became legendary not just for their exquisite jewelry and timepieces, but for their commitment to educating customers, supporting minority entrepreneurs, and creating opportunities in an industry historically known for exclusion. Today represents one of Alexander's most critical business practices: unannounced quality assessments that reveal the true character of his retail partnerships. Unlike traditional corporate inspections that give advance notice, Alexander appears without warning, dressed as an everyday customer, to experience firsthand whether his business partners are upholding the values of inclusion and respect that define his brand. These covert evaluations have become essential to maintaining the integrity of Prestige Holdings, ensuring that his name and investment are associated only with establishments that treat all customers as valued human beings. This particular afternoon, Alexander has chosen Diamond Elite, an upscale Beverly Hills jewelry store where he serves as a silent partner. Located on Rodeo Drive in the heart of luxury shopping, this establishment represents everything Alexander values: exceptional craftsmanship, rare gemstones, and exclusive timepieces that attract the most discerning clientele. The irony isn't lost on him that this temple of luxury sits in a city historically known for both glamour and subtle discrimination. As Alexander approaches the gleaming storefront of Diamond Elite, adjusting his casual jeans and simple t-shirt, an outfit deliberately chosen to test whether his staff judge customers by appearance rather than potential, he has no idea that the next hour will expose the very prejudices he spent his career fighting against.
The employees inside are about to make assumptions that will not only cost them their careers, but reveal how deeply racism penetrates even the most exclusive retail environments. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of how much money they appear to have, if you've ever been made to feel unwelcome in a space where you belonged, then hit that like button because Alexander's story is about to get intense. Comment below if you've experienced discrimination while shopping, and subscribe to our channel because we're exposing the uncomfortable truths about bias in luxury retail while celebrating the leaders who refuse to accept prejudice as normal business practice.
But the moment Alexander stepped through those polished glass doors into his own jewelry store, he walked straight into a masterclass on how prejudice operates in America's most exclusive retail spaces. The interior of Diamond Elite was everything Alexander had envisioned when he invested millions into this partnership. Gleaming display cases filled with rare diamonds, vintage Rolexes, and custom pieces that represented the pinnacle of luxury craftsmanship. Crystal chandeliers cast perfect light on precious metals, while soft classical music created an atmosphere of refined elegance. But as the door chimed his arrival, Alexander immediately sensed a shift in the store's carefully orchestrated ambiance that had nothing to do with luxury and everything to do with bias. Behind the main counter, store manager Rachel Sterling looked up from her computer screen, and her expression immediately hardened the moment her eyes registered Alexander's casual appearance. Her trained smile, which had been warm and welcoming for previous customers, transformed into something cold and suspicious. The way her gaze swept from his simple t-shirt to his jeans revealed everything about the assumptions she was already making based on his appearance rather than his potential as a customer. Alexander approached the watch display with genuine curiosity, ready to assess how his sales team handled customer inquiries about their most exclusive timepieces. His question was straightforward and informed. "Could you tell me about the movement quality in your Patek Philippe collection? I'm particularly interested in the complications and craftsmanship differences between your vintage and contemporary pieces." These were exactly the kinds of sophisticated questions that luxury retailers should expect from serious collectors and investors. But sales associate Jessica Chen's response revealed the toxic assumptions that Alexander had spent his career trying to eliminate from luxury retail. Her voice turned condescending as she replied, "Sir, these pieces start at $50,000 and can reach well into six figures. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable looking at our costume jewelry section over there." She gestured dismissively toward a small display of inexpensive accessories, making it clear she'd already decided Alexander couldn't afford genuine luxury goods. The contrast in treatment became glaringly obvious as Alexander observed other interactions happening simultaneously throughout the store. When wealthy-looking white customer Robert Chang asked about diamond investment potential, Jessica's demeanor transformed completely. Enthusiastic explanations, patient guidance through various options, and even offers to arrange private viewings of exclusive pieces not on display. When elegant older woman Margaret Foster inquired about custom design services, she received immediate attention from multiple staff members eager to discuss her vision and budget. But when Alexander asked a follow-up question about the store's authentication certificates and provenance documentation for vintage pieces, information any serious collector would want to know, Jessica's impatience became unmistakable. "Sir, our authentication processes are quite comprehensive, but I think you might be more interested in pieces that are more accessible to general customers," she responded with barely concealed irritation. The phrase "general customers" carried clear implications about who belonged in elite jewelry establishments and who didn't. Alexander found himself being categorized as someone unworthy of serious attention, despite being surrounded by inventory he'd personally helped select and finance. The psychological impact was crushing, being treated like an unwelcome intruder in a business partnership he'd created to combat exactly this kind of discrimination.
What Jessica and her colleagues didn't realize was that their prejudiced assumptions were about to trigger a chain of events that would expose the ugly reality of bias in luxury retail and cost them everything they thought they were protecting.
What happened next would transform Jessica's subtle dismissal into something far more sinister, as Alexander's continued interest in luxury goods triggered a coordinated surveillance campaign that exposed the ugly machinery of retail racial profiling. Despite the cold reception, Alexander persisted with his quality assessment, moving toward the exclusive timepiece section where the store's most valuable inventory was displayed. His request was specific and sophisticated. "I'd like to examine your $75,000 Rolex collection, particularly the vintage Submariner and GMT models. I'm interested in understanding the investment potential and authenticity guarantees for pieces in this price range." This was exactly the kind of inquiry that should have excited any luxury sales professional, a customer expressing serious interest in high-value merchandise. But Alexander's request triggered something much more alarming than simple dismissal. From behind the security office, Rachel Sterling began monitoring him intensely through the store's surveillance system, her fingers hovering over panic buttons as if she were tracking a known criminal rather than observing a potential customer. The way she studied his movements, zoomed in on his hands near expensive merchandise, and alerted other staff members revealed a level of suspicion reserved for people she'd already decided were threats. Security guard Marcus Thompson, an imposing man whose presence was meant to provide comfort to legitimate customers, began following Alexander with the kind of obvious surveillance typically used to intimidate shoplifters. Thompson positioned himself just close enough to make Alexander feel uncomfortable, his hand resting near his radio as if preparing to call for backup at any moment. The message was clear. Alexander was being treated like a criminal whose every movement needed monitoring. The situation escalated dramatically when Assistant Manager David Kim joined what was becoming a coordinated effort to intimidate Alexander into leaving. Kim whispered urgently to other staff members, "Keep a close eye on that guy near the Rolex display. He's asking very specific questions about our most expensive pieces, and his behavior is suspicious. This is exactly how thieves case expensive inventory before planning future robberies." The assumptions underlying Kim's warning were devastating in their prejudice. Alexander's informed questions about luxury timepieces, the kind of inquiries that would be welcomed from white customers, were being interpreted as criminal reconnaissance simply because of his appearance. His sophisticated knowledge of watch complications and investment values, which should have identified him as a serious collector, was instead being viewed as evidence of criminal intent. When Alexander moved to examine the loose diamond collection, asking about clarity grades, certification processes, and custom setting options, the staff's paranoia reached new heights. Jessica Chen exchanged knowing looks with her colleagues, their silent communication revealing their shared assumption that no legitimate customer who looked like Alexander would have genuine interest in such expensive merchandise. "He's definitely planning something," Kim whispered to Thompson, loud enough for nearby customers to overhear. "Nobody asks that many detailed questions about our security procedures and valuable inventory unless they're gathering information for criminal purposes. We need to be ready to act if he tries anything suspicious." The irony was staggering. Alexander was being surveilled as a potential thief while examining inventory he'd personally helped finance, in a store where his investment had created the very jobs now being used to discriminate against him. The employees who were supposed to represent his business values were instead revealing the exact prejudices he'd spent his career fighting. What they didn't realize was that their coordinated surveillance campaign was about to trigger consequences that would expose their bias to the entire luxury retail industry and beyond. But what erupted next would transform their paranoid surveillance into a public accusation so shocking and unfounded that it would expose the most toxic assumptions about race, wealth, and who deserves access to luxury goods in America. Alexander, determined to complete his assessment despite the obvious hostility, made what should have been a routine business inquiry that any serious investor would ask. Could you explain your authentication processes and insurance policies for high-value pieces? I'm also curious about your security protocols and how you handle valuable inventory transfers. These were exactly the kinds of questions that responsible luxury retailers should expect from customers making significant investments in precious goods. But to Rachel Sterling, already consumed by racial paranoia, Alexander's informed questions represented the final confirmation of her worst assumptions. She emerged from behind the counter with the righteous anger of someone who believed she was protecting her establishment from imminent criminal threat. "Sir, you need to stop right there," she announced loudly enough for the entire store to hear. "You're asking very specific questions about our security systems and valuable inventory. This is exactly how thieves gather information before committing crimes." The public accusation sent shockwaves through the elegant store atmosphere. Other customers turned to stare, their faces showing mixtures of concern and uncomfortable curiosity as they tried to process what they were witnessing. Sterling's voice carried the authority of someone who had convinced herself she was a hero preventing a major theft, but her words revealed the ugly reality of how quickly suspicion transforms into accusation when prejudice drives decision-making. Head jeweler Patricia Lopez, drawn by the commotion, immediately joined Sterling's campaign without questioning the evidence or asking for Alexander's perspective. "I've been watching him too," she declared, lending her professional credibility to the baseless accusations. "He's been asking detailed questions about every expensive piece in the store, wanting to know about security cameras, insurance coverage, and inventory procedures. No legitimate customer needs that level of information about our operations." The coordinated character assassination reached its peak when Sterling made the decision that would transform this discriminatory encounter into a potential life-threatening situation. She grabbed the phone and dialed 911, her voice carrying urgency and fear as she reported, "We need police immediately at Diamond Elite on Rodeo Drive. We have a suspicious black male asking detailed questions about our most expensive jewelry and security procedures. He is obviously casing our store for a robbery. We need officers here now before he escalates the situation." The way Sterling emphasized Alexander's race to the emergency dispatcher revealed everything about her motivations. She wasn't reporting suspicious behavior, she was reporting the presence of a black man in a space where she didn't believe he belonged. Her call to police transformed what should have been a customer service interaction into a potentially dangerous confrontation where Alexander's life could be at risk. Assistant manager David Kim began providing commentary to other customers, further poisoning the atmosphere. "This is why we have to be so careful in luxury retail. Some people come in here pretending to be serious customers, but they're really just gathering information for future crimes. You have to watch for the warning signs, too many detailed questions, interest in security procedures, asking about valuable inventory." The public nature of Kim's statements created a mob mentality where Alexander found himself surrounded by people who had decided he was a criminal based on nothing more than the store management's prejudiced assumptions. The psychological pressure was immense. Being treated as a threat in a business he'd helped create, watching employees he'd indirectly hired coordinate his public humiliation. If this story is making your blood boil, if you're feeling the injustice of seeing someone accused of crimes they haven't committed based purely on appearance, then hit that like button because this situation is about to get even more intense. Comment below if you've ever been falsely accused or treated like a criminal while shopping, and subscribe to our channel because Alexander's response to this humiliation will prove that truth and justice can still prevail when courage meets opportunity. But even as this nightmare of false accusations spiraled around him, Alexander demonstrated the strategic composure that had built his billion-dollar empire, quietly gathering the evidence that would soon expose this discrimination in the most devastating way possible. While the staff orchestrated their campaign to paint him as a criminal, Alexander maintained the calm professionalism that had carried him through countless business challenges. He understood something his accusers didn't, that in today's interconnected world, truth has a way of surfacing, and patience often proves more powerful than anger. Discreetly, he activated his phone's recording app, ensuring that every discriminatory statement, every baseless accusation, every coordinated effort to criminalize his presence was being permanently documented. "I'd like to get everyone's full names and positions, please," Alexander requested with quiet dignity, his voice steady despite the hostile atmosphere that had engulfed the store. The request seemed reasonable enough to any objective observer, but it sent waves of uncertainty through the staff who had been so confident in their accusations just moments before. Rachel Sterling responded with obvious agitation. "Why do you need our names? That's exactly what someone planning retaliation would ask, trying to identify employees for some kind of revenge scheme after we've exposed their criminal intentions." Her paranoia was spiraling, transforming Alexander's reasonable request for accountability into further evidence of malicious intent. But Alexander persisted with methodical determination, collecting the information that would soon prove crucial. Rachel Sterling, store manager; Jessica Chen, sales associate; David Kim, assistant manager; Patricia Lopez, head jeweler; Marcus Thompson, security guard. Each name represented someone whose career was about to be destroyed by their own prejudice and poor judgment. During this tense documentation process, one customer began to show visible discomfort with the spectacle unfolding in what should have been an elegant retail environment. Dr. Sarah Williams, a prominent civil rights attorney who had been quietly browsing estate jewelry, found herself unable to ignore the obvious injustice playing out before her eyes. Her legal training had taught her to recognize discrimination in all its forms, and what she was witnessing was textbook racial profiling disguised as security concerns. Dr. Williams approached the group with the quiet authority that came from years of fighting injustice in courtrooms across the country. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with professional clarity, "but I've been observing this entire interaction, and this gentleman has done absolutely nothing that warrants this level of suspicion or these accusations. He's asked informed questions about luxury goods, which is exactly what any serious customer should do." Her intervention carried particular weight because she embodied everything the store claimed to value. She was clearly affluent, professionally accomplished, and undeniably belonged in their exclusive establishment. But her support for Alexander seemed to threaten the narrative that Sterling and her team had constructed to justify their discriminatory treatment. Sterling turned on Dr. Williams with barely controlled frustration. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't understand the security challenges we face in luxury retail. We have to be vigilant about people who ask too many detailed questions about our operations and valuable inventory. This individual's behavior matches classic patterns of criminal reconnaissance." But Dr. Williams wasn't intimidated by Sterling's authoritative claims. "I'm a civil rights attorney, Miss Sterling, and I've spent 15 years studying discriminatory practices in retail establishments. What I'm witnessing here isn't security vigilance, it's racial profiling. This man has been polite, knowledgeable, and patient despite being treated with obvious bias from the moment he entered your store." Her professional assessment began to influence other customers who had been watching the confrontation unfold. Some pulled out their phones, no longer recording what they thought was a potential criminal situation, but documenting what they were beginning to recognize as discriminatory treatment of an innocent customer. The arrival of police officers Jennifer Martinez and Robert Chen shifted the atmosphere dramatically, but not in the way the store staff had anticipated. Officer Martinez, a 12-year veteran with extensive training in bias recognition and de-escalation, immediately assessed the situation with professional skepticism rather than automatic support for the business reporting the complaint. "What exactly is the nature of the alleged criminal activity?" Officer Martinez asked Sterling, her tone suggesting she wanted concrete evidence rather than vague suspicions. When Sterling began explaining about suspicious questions and obvious casing behavior, Martinez turned to Alexander with genuine interest rather than presumption of guilt. "Sir, can you tell me what you were doing in the store today?" she asked, treating Alexander as a potential victim rather than a presumed perpetrator. This simple act of giving Alexander equal voice in the narrative marked a crucial turning point in how the situation was being perceived by everyone present. Alexander's response was calm, articulate, and completely at odds with the frantic accusations being made by store management. "Officer Chen, I came here to look at luxury timepieces and jewelry. I asked informed questions about quality, authentication, and investment potential, the same questions any serious collector would ask. I was treated with suspicion from the moment I entered, followed by security, and now accused of planning crimes based on nothing more than my appearance and interest in expensive merchandise." Officer Chen, who had been quietly observing the body language and demeanor of everyone involved, noted the stark contrast between Alexander's composed professionalism and the agitated defensiveness of the store staff. "Sir, do you have identification with you?" he asked Alexander, treating the request as routine documentation rather than criminal investigation. Meanwhile, the store staff continued their campaign of character assassination, seemingly unaware that their coordinated effort to paint Alexander as a threat was actually exposing their own biases to trained law enforcement officers. Patricia Lopez loudly discussed with colleagues how they had prevented a major heist through their vigilance, while David Kim provided commentary to customers about the sophisticated methods modern criminals use to case luxury establishments. What none of them realized was that their confident assertions of heroism were being recorded not just by Alexander, but by multiple witnesses who were beginning to understand that they were documenting something far more significant than a simple customer service dispute. They were capturing evidence of systematic discrimination that would soon expose the ugly truth about bias in America's most exclusive retail spaces. Right at that moment, when the false accusations had reached their absolute peak, and it seemed like prejudice would triumph once again, Alexander decided it was time to reveal the truth that would shatter every assumption and turn this entire nightmare on its head. The profound silence that followed Alexander's next words was so complete that the gentle hum of the store's climate control system seemed deafeningly loud. "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding here," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that hadn't been present before, the tone of someone who was about to fundamentally alter the power dynamics in the room. "My name is Alexander Hayes, and I'm a silent partner and co-owner of this store." The reaction was swift and entirely predictable. Nervous laughter erupted from the staff, who assumed this was some desperate attempt to escape the consequences of what they believed was criminal behavior. Rachel Sterling actually snorted with derision, shaking her head in what appeared to be pity for someone so delusional. "Sir, now you're just making the situation worse for yourself. Claiming to own a multi-million-dollar luxury jewelry store is not going to help you here." Jessica Chen joined in the mockery with obvious disdain. "This is really pathetic now. He's having some kind of breakdown, claiming to be a business owner when he's clearly just trying to avoid arrest. Sir, making false statements to police officers is going to get you in much more serious trouble than just being asked to leave a store." But Alexander wasn't finished with his revelation.
With the same methodical precision he'd used to build his retail empire from a single pawn shop, he reached into his wallet and produced official partnership documents, business cards embossed with the Prestige Holdings logo, and legal papers that bore all the hallmarks of authentic corporate materials that would be impossible to fake convincingly. "Officer Martinez," Alexander said, handing her the documentation, "you can verify my partnership status through our corporate attorneys, or I can provide direct contact information for the primary owner, Michael Davidson, who can confirm my investment and ownership stake in this establishment." His calm confidence and specific offer of verification began to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of everyone present. But the most dramatic confirmation came when Alexander reached into his jacket and produced a set of keys that the staff immediately recognized. The distinctive brass keys that opened the store's private office and security areas, keys that only ownership-level partners possessed. "These are the partner access keys that Michael gave me when we finalized our investment agreement," Alexander explained, holding up the unmistakable proof of his authority. The sight of those keys sent visible shock waves through the staff. David Kim's face went completely white as he began to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. Patricia Lopez actually staggered backward, her hand flying to her mouth in horror as the implications of their treatment began to crash down on her.
Alexander then pulled out his phone and dialed a number that would soon remove all doubt about his claims. "Michael, this is Alexander," he said, speaking to his business partner, who had been instrumental in establishing Diamond Elite as a premier Beverly Hills destination. "I'm at the store conducting a quality assessment, and we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Can you come down here right away?" Michael Davidson's response carried clearly through the phone speaker, his voice showing immediate concern and respect. "Alexander, of course. Is everything all right? Are you hurt? I can be there in 15 minutes. The genuine worry in Davidson's voice and his obvious deference to Alexander provided compelling evidence that the partnership claims were absolutely legitimate. But Alexander had one more dramatic demonstration of his authority that would remove any remaining doubt about his identity. He walked to the store's main security terminal, the one that controlled access to the most sensitive areas of the business. Under the shocked gaze of Sterling and the other staff members, Alexander entered a complex access code that only partnership-level management would possess. "Computer, activate owner verification protocol," he said clearly, his voice triggering the store's advanced security system that only responded to pre-registered ownership voices. The computer's response was immediate and unmistakable. "Welcome, Mr. Hayes. Partnership verification confirmed. All security and management protocols are now accessible." The technological confirmation that Alexander's voice was recognized by the store's most secure systems sent absolute shockwaves through everyone present. Rachel Sterling's confident demeanor crumbled completely as she began to understand that she had just accused her own business partner of planning to rob his own store. Jessica Chen looked like she was about to be physically sick as the reality of their massive error became undeniable. Officer Martinez exchanged meaningful glances with her partner, both of them beginning to understand that they had walked into a situation far more complex than a simple theft prevention call. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had been watching the revelation unfold with professional interest, began to smile despite the gravity of what she had witnessed. But the final, irrefutable confirmation arrived exactly 14 minutes later when Michael Davidson burst through the store's main entrance, immediately scanning the crowd until his eyes found Alexander. "Alex," he called out, rushing toward him with obvious concern and respect. "What happened? Are you okay? When you said we had a situation, I was worried something serious had occurred." His genuine worry, his instant recognition of Alexander as his business partner, and his obvious deference provided the ultimate proof that every claim Alexander had made was absolutely true.
The man they had treated like a criminal, accused of planning to rob expensive jewelry and threatened with arrest, was indeed the co-owner of the very establishment where they worked. The staff who had been so confident in their accusations just minutes before now stood frozen in absolute terror, finally understanding that they hadn't just discriminated against a customer, they had publicly humiliated their own business partner, the man whose investment that created their jobs and whose values they had utterly betrayed.
What followed next was a swift and devastating display of partnership justice that would send shockwaves through the entire luxury retail industry and prove that discrimination comes with real, immediate consequences that destroy careers in minutes. Alexander looked directly at Michael Davidson, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just witnessed the complete betrayal of everything their business partnership represented. Michael, I want you to document exactly what occurred here today, because we're about to implement changes that will ensure this level of discrimination never happens again in any store where we have investment interests. He gestured toward the staff members who were now trembling with the realization that their careers were about to end. These employees accused me of planning to rob our own store, called police to report me as a criminal, and orchestrated a public humiliation campaign based solely on my appearance and their assumptions about my worthiness as a customer. These employees accused me of planning to rob our own store, called police to report me as a criminal, and orchestrated a public humiliation campaign based solely on my appearance and their assumptions about my worthiness as a customer. The terminations began immediately and without ceremony, each one delivered with the precision of someone who understood that swift action was the only appropriate response to such blatant discrimination. "Rachel Sterling," Alexander announced, his voice carrying throughout the store's elegant interior, "your employment with Diamond Elite is terminated effective immediately. Your accusation that I was casing our store for criminal activity, your decision to call police without cause, and your complete failure to uphold the inclusive values that define our partnership make you unfit to represent this establishment." Sterling opened her mouth to protest, perhaps to offer some desperate explanation or apology, but Alexander continued with unwavering resolve. "You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings under security supervision. Your access to all store systems has been revoked, and you will be escorted from the premises immediately." Jessica Chen's termination followed with equal swiftness and finality. "Jessica, your dismissive treatment of customers based on appearance, your assumption that I belonged in the costume jewelry section, and your participation in a coordinated campaign of suspicion demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of luxury retail values. Your employment is terminated immediately." The young woman who had been so confident in her gatekeeping authority just an hour earlier now stood speechless, watching her career in high-end retail crumble in real time. David Kim, who had coordinated much of the surveillance and suspicious whispering, received his verdict with devastating clarity. "David, your statement suggesting I was gathering information for criminal purposes and your role in creating a hostile environment for a paying customer reveal a level of bias that cannot be tolerated in any business where I have partnership interests. You're terminated immediately, and your final compensation will reflect only the hours worked through today." Patricia Lopez, the head jeweler who had lent her professional credibility to the baseless accusations, faced her own reckoning. "Patricia, your immediate assumption that my informed questions indicated criminal intent without any evidence or investigation shows a dangerous prejudice that undermines everything we've built here. Your employment is terminated effective immediately." But Alexander's response extended beyond simple terminations to address the broader implications of what had occurred.
Marcus Thompson, the security guard who had followed Alexander like a suspected criminal, learned that his contract was being terminated immediately. Marcus, your treatment of a customer as a threat based solely on appearance, without any actual suspicious behavior, violates every principle of professional security work. Your services are no longer needed at this or any other Prestige Holdings location.
Alexander then turned to the police officers who had responded to the call, his tone respectful but firm. Officers Martinez and Chen, I want to commend you both for maintaining professionalism and asking questions rather than making assumptions. However, I will be filing a detailed report with your department about how this false report was generated, not to criticize your response, but to ensure that future discrimination complaints are investigated with appropriate skepticism. The most powerful moment came when Alexander addressed the customers who had witnessed the entire spectacle. Many still had their phones out, some had been recording, and all were now part of a story that would spread far beyond the walls of Diamond Elite. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today is exactly why I invested in luxury retail, because discrimination in high-end shopping is real, it's pervasive, and it denies people access to goods and services they have every right to purchase. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had courageously spoken up during the discrimination, stepped forward with obvious emotion. Mr. Hayes, what happened to you today happens to successful people of color constantly, but we rarely have the platform or authority to fight back effectively. Thank you for showing us that someone with power is willing to use it to protect others who face similar treatment. Her words resonated throughout the store, highlighting the broader significance of what had just occurred. This wasn't just about one incident of false accusations. It was about the countless times similar treatment goes unchallenged because the victims don't have the authority or resources to demand accountability. Michael Davidson was already coordinating the immediate operational response to ensure Diamond Elite could continue serving customers despite the sudden loss of key staff. Alex, I'm calling in our management team from the West Hollywood location. We'll have full staffing restored within 2 hours, and I'll personally oversee operations until we can hire and train replacement staff who understand our values. But as the terminated employees were escorted from the building, their faces showing the devastating realization that their prejudice had destroyed their careers in luxury retail, Alexander was already planning something far more comprehensive than simple firings. Michael, what happened here today was unacceptable, but it's going to become the catalyst for transformation that protects every customer who walks through our doors, regardless of how they look or what assumptions people make about their purchasing power. The revolution that was about to unfold would reshape not just Diamond Elite and Prestige Holdings, but establish new standards for the entire luxury retail industry's approach to inclusion, bias prevention, and customer dignity. What Alexander announced next would not only revolutionize his luxury retail empire, but spark a nationwide transformation in how high-end businesses address discrimination and create truly inclusive shopping experiences for all customers, regardless of their background or appearance. Standing in the center of his jewelry store, surrounded by customers, new staff, and media representatives who had begun arriving after word of the incident spread across social media, Alexander unveiled an initiative that would become the gold standard for luxury retail anti-discrimination efforts across America. Today marks the launch of Operation Prestige Access, he declared, his voice carrying the same passion that had driven him from a single pawn shop to a billion-dollar empire. This isn't just about preventing what happened here from occurring again. This is about fundamentally transforming how luxury retail operates and ensuring that exceptional goods and services are accessible to everyone who appreciates quality, regardless of assumptions about their worthiness or background. The scope of Operation Prestige Access was revolutionary in both its comprehensiveness and its commitment to measurable change. Alexander outlined a $3 million initiative that would be implemented across all Prestige Holdings partnerships and investments within 90 days.
Every employee in every luxury establishment where we have business interests will complete intensive anti-bias training developed in partnership with the Anti-Defamation League, the NAACP, and leading civil rights organizations, he announced. But this won't be superficial corporate diversity training that employees forget the moment they leave the classroom. This will be immersive, scenario-based education that addresses real situations and creates genuine accountability for discriminatory behavior. The training program Alexander described went far beyond typical retail workshops. Employees would learn to recognize unconscious bias in customer interactions, understand the historical context of retail discrimination, practice inclusive sales techniques that welcome all customers, and face real consequences for bias-driven behavior. We're partnering with UCLA's Anderson School of Management to develop assessment protocols that measure not just what employees claim to have learned, but how they actually treat customers from different backgrounds in real-world situations, Alexander explained. But training represented only the foundation of Operation Prestige Access's transformative approach. Alexander announced sweeping changes to hiring, promotion, and operational practices that would fundamentally alter how luxury retail functions. Moving forward, every Prestige Holdings partnership must maintain staff diversity that reflects and celebrates the communities we serve. We're establishing scholarship programs with fashion merchandising schools at Howard University, Spelman College, and other historically Black institutions to create direct pathways for diverse talent in luxury retail management. The technology component of Operation Prestige Access represented perhaps the most innovative aspect of the entire initiative. Alexander revealed that Prestige Holdings would be implementing artificial intelligence systems designed to detect and prevent discriminatory service patterns in real time. These systems will monitor customer interactions, service timing, product recommendations, and staff behavior to identify bias before it escalates into the kind of situation we witness today, he explained. If the system detects that customers of certain backgrounds are receiving different treatment, being followed by security, receiving less attention, or being steered toward less expensive merchandise, it will immediately alert management and trigger intervention protocols. The community impact elements of Operation Prestige Access addressed the broader accessibility issues that had motivated Alexander throughout his career. We're establishing community education programs that teach jewelry investment, luxury goods authentication, and financial literacy to underserved populations who have been historically excluded from high-end retail experiences, he announced. We're also creating a fund that provides grants to minority entrepreneurs starting luxury goods businesses, because diversity in ownership leads to diversity in access. Dr. Sarah Williams, the attorney who had courageously defended Alexander during the discrimination incident, was invited to share her perspective on the broader implications of luxury retail bias. Mr. Hayes is addressing something that successful people of color experience constantly but rarely see acknowledged by those with the power to create change, she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless encounters with exclusion. Luxury retail has historically been a space where our money is welcome, but our presence is merely tolerated. Tonight's announcement represents hope that this is finally changing in meaningful ways. 6 months later, the transformation was undeniable and had exceeded even Alexander's ambitious expectations. Diamond Elite had become a model of inclusive luxury retail that business schools studied and other establishments attempted to replicate. The diverse staff, led by new store manager Keisha Johnson, a gemology graduate from the Gemological Institute of America, provided exceptional service that celebrated rather than merely tolerated customer diversity. Sales had increased by 28%, customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and Diamond Elite had become a destination for discerning shoppers seeking both exceptional merchandise and authentic respect. The broader impact of Operation Prestige Access rippled throughout the luxury retail industry and beyond. Competing jewelry stores, watch boutiques, and high-end fashion retailers began implementing similar anti-bias programs after facing customer pressure inspired by Prestige Holdings' leadership. Business schools started requiring retail equity training as part of their curriculum. Industry associations began developing bias prevention standards. The technology solutions pioneered by Prestige Holdings were licensed to department stores, galleries, and other luxury businesses across the country. Alexander's story became required reading in business ethics courses, retail management programs, and civil rights organizations as an example of how leadership can transform crisis into lasting positive change. But for Alexander, the most meaningful validation came from customers like Dr. Williams, who now brought colleagues and friends to Prestige Holdings locations because she knew they would be treated with genuine respect and receive exceptional service. Luxury goods should celebrate the diversity of people who appreciate craftsmanship, beauty, and quality, Alexander said during his keynote address at the National Retail Federation's annual conference. What happened to me that day was painful and humiliating, but it became the catalyst for changes that are protecting millions of customers across America. Sometimes it takes experiencing injustice personally to understand the urgency of fighting it systematically. But the real victory comes when we use our platforms to ensure that others never have to endure what we've survived. The legacy of that false theft accusation had been transformed into a nationwide movement for luxury retail equity that continues to expand, proving that individual courage combined with systemic action can create lasting change that makes high-end shopping truly accessible to everyone who appreciates excellence, regardless of how they look or where they come from.
Alexander Hayes' story exposes a painful truth about luxury retail in America, that exclusion often masquerades as exclusivity, and discrimination hides behind the language of security and standards. What makes this story truly powerful isn't just the dramatic reveal or the swift justice, but how Alexander transformed his personal humiliation into protection for millions of shoppers who will never know his name but will benefit from his courage to demand change. The real lesson here goes deeper than corporate accountability or employee training. It's about understanding that when we witness discrimination, we have a choice. We can be like Dr. Sarah Williams, who courageously spoke up when she saw injustice, or we can be silent bystanders who allow prejudice to flourish in spaces where everyone deserves respect. Alexander didn't just fire discriminatory employees, he rebuilt entire systems because he understood that lasting change requires more than punishment, it demands transformation. From an insider's perspective, what Alexander accomplished with Operation Prestige Access represents something revolutionary in luxury retail. Most high-end stores respond to discrimination incidents with damage control and superficial policy changes. Alexander responded by fundamentally altering how luxury shopping operates, investing $3 million in communities that have been systematically excluded and creating technology that prevents bias before it escalates into public humiliation. The most profound truth in this story is that our worst experiences can become our greatest opportunities to protect others. Alexander could have quietly fired those employees and moved on. Instead, he chose to use his platform, his resources, and his influence to ensure that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else in stores where he has partnership interests. That's the difference between revenge and justice, between anger and action, between being a victim and being a catalyst for systemic change. But here's what we all need to understand. Alexander Hayes shouldn't have to be a billionaire business owner to receive basic respect while shopping for jewelry. The fact that it took revealing massive authority to stop false theft accusations shows us how much work remains in creating truly inclusive retail spaces. Every time we choose silence over speaking up, every time we accept that's just how luxury retail works, we're enabling the very systems that create these painful moments. Luxury goods should celebrate the diversity of people who appreciate craftsmanship, beauty, and quality, not serve as gatekeeping mechanisms that determine worthiness based on appearance. Alexander's courage proved that when we refuse to accept discrimination as normal, when we use our platforms to demand better, we can create ripple effects that transform entire industries.
If this story moved you, if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how much money they appear to have, then your voice matters in this fight. Hit that like button to show YouTube that stories about justice and transformation deserve to reach more people. Drop a comment sharing your own experiences with retail discrimination or telling us what change you want to see in luxury shopping, because real transformation starts with real conversations about uncomfortable truths. And please subscribe to this channel because we're committed to sharing more stories that expose injustice while celebrating the leaders who refuse to accept that's just how things are. Together, we can ensure that Alexander's courage creates the lasting change our communities desperately need.